Oh, what an intro. Thank you for that, Amanda. Hopefully you can all hear me and my head's kind of in the right spot. I've presented it at many forums over the years, never from my study in the Southern Highlands looking at a little camera on my computer screen. So hopefully it goes well and you won't hear too many dogs and cats and chickens and everything else that's running around outside. Okay, so I really want to talk today about the changing face of retail. So we've obviously seen various presenters talk about the specific impact of COVID and some of the profound changes that we're seeing, be it either in our behavior or retailers' behaviors or brand behavior, specifically through COVID. I kind of want to cast the net a little more broadly than that, to really look at some of the underlying trends and how that's maybe going to shape retail going forwards, and conversely then what that means for suppliers, for manufacturers doing business with those retailers. All right, hopefully things are moving on. Yes, they are. As already said, we started in about 2010 and worked with a whole bunch of folk, be it either from a retailing perspective or a manufacturing perspective. So. And I'd say probably 60–65% of our business is working with manufacturers on how to more effectively do business with retailers. How do you build your brands in categories, and how do you do a better job of engaging with shoppers and consumers? So without kind of spending too much time on who we are, let's get into it. I just love this picture. I don't know whether it's photoshopped or real, but it'd be a pretty brave man to pull the tail of a rhinoceros. I'm told it's a black rhino. I can't confirm that. The change we're going through really in retail started about 100 odd years ago when we started seeing the emergence of supermarkets. I think it's fair to say in those first 70, 80 years, when we look back, the change was relatively slow and really not that profound. In the last 20 years, the change has been significantly more profound, and in the last 10, obviously, it's accelerated again. So it's following, I guess, many trends, be it technology. Retail is not immune to this exponential curve of change, where every year we seem to now be having something new, something different. And certainly the next 5 years, I think, are going to be even more profound than the previous 15. So you kind of look at the last 100 years, and Coles started in 1914. So that is only 106 odd years ago, and we've seen as a retailer they've clearly evolved materially over that 106 odd years. But back 2001, you see there kind of some of the home shopping kicking off, and through to 2020 with food for later. So they're all kind of really good and worthy developments, and really important things for the evolution of retail. But in fairness, they haven't really profoundly changed the way that we do business as shoppers. So that growth, and again, just a picture of Woolworths here, but same. A lot of that growth over the last 20, 30, 40 years has been at the expense of what we affectionately often call the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. So be that the milk bars in Vic or butchers in other states, a lot of those small retailers really have struggled to compete with the convenience and progressively improved quality, and obviously tremendous pricing that the retailers are able to offer in comparison to a little veg shop or a little baker's. So you've seen a consolidation of grocery retailing over the last 20, 30 years, as particularly Woolworths and Coles have got bigger, and to all intents and purposes, a duopoly. IGA and the independents have bounced between, I guess, 11 and 12% in the heyday to maybe 7 or 8% now. And obviously Aldi now's come in with a circa 10, 11 share, depending on when and how you want to measure it. But still, 70% plus, pushing towards 80% of the grocery volume is done through Woolworths and Coles. So it's been fair to say that for the last 20 years there's been a consolidation of grocery purchasing into Woolworths and Coles. We're just at the last 15 years, and I came out to Australia in 2002, so 18 odd years ago, just indeed as Aldi had launched. Even though I sound like a POM, I'm originally from Germany and grew up as a kid with Aldi around the corner, so I was very familiar with it. And no surprise that they have aggressively developed their Australian presence. But even you look kind of 2007, the iPhone. I can't imagine life somehow without a smartphone. But it really is only 13 years, and you start looking at even tighter time frames around Uber Eats and HelloFresh and the like. These are all things that have happened literally in the last dozen or so years. That whilst outside of Aldi, any one of them might not necessarily be of a scale to directly compete and threaten a Woolworths and a Coles, they're all slowly having quite a profound impact on the way that we think about buying our groceries and the way that we then purchase those groceries in the marketplace. So, and you say, well, what's Airbnb got to do with this? But it's really the idea. And in 2009, a couple of lads in America thought it'd be a really cool idea to rent out their spare room. And the rest is history. I mean, pre-COVID, market estimate of 30 odd billion US dollars. So not a small business. The bit that's interesting is that they don't own any property. They don't actually have any houses or hotels. So all of their effort and endeavor is in marketing their offer and running the technology behind it. And then obviously clipping the ticket on the way through of people renting out their houses or their rooms. Why is that interesting for us? Well, you look at people like Kogan and Bunnings, so kind of getting a little bit closer to home, firstly in Australia, but also in general retail. And both of them now have what is generally referred to as a marketplace offer. And why does that matter? Well, it matters because you can now buy products that neither Bunnings or Kogan have ever bought. So they don't necessarily offer those products in their stores. They just make them available through their front door. So they're not holding stock. They're placing the order on the supplier when they in turn have the order placed on them. So they're just the middleman that are leveraging their brand presence, their digital footfall or their digital profile in the marketplace, and allowing shoppers to buy literally hundreds of thousands of products through their front door. And just like Airbnb, they're obviously clipping the ticket on the way through. So for me, that's one of the first kind of big, profound changes that's happened in the last 10 years that is likely to see a continued change that will undoubtedly impact grocery. And we'll start seeing kind of refer to them often as pure plays, but specific offers opening up that will start cherry picking different things from our overall grocery shopping list. So that whole trend of marketplace offers, Amazon obviously does the same, and Amazon are pushing their grocery offer, launched with much fear in the marketplace in Australia. I think fair to say we've not really felt the impact of the mighty Amazon yet. But they are there for the long term. So that kind of offer, that kind of solution will inevitably continue to grow. Call them pure plays, call them what you will, but people like Pet Circle, I think, are a really interesting business. Again, just reading, and this is what I've read online, so apologies if it's not attributed, but they are believed to be the third biggest online pet shop in the world. So little old Australian company with 500,000 pet parents subscribing to their service. We buy product from them as well. They only started 9 years ago. So again, in the history of retailing, so I'm conscious when I move my hands here, you can't see them. So if my head moves, my hands are moving. They've been around for less than 10 years, and they've got a really sizable business with a significant base of people buying their product. And particularly if you're buying things like dog food or cat litter, big bulky items, getting that delivered once every 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks on their subscription model at the same price or potentially even less than Woolworths and Coles is clearly an attractive offer that they've tapped into. We're all familiar with Chemist Warehouse. Again, only 20 years old. And again, depending on how you want to measure it, be that script, PBS, or pharmaceuticals or even over the counter, they are somewhere between 25 and 50% of those categories in Australia. So an enormous business, estimated $5 billion turnover, albeit, again, much publicized, paper thin margins, but again, a profoundly different business model that they operate, looking at different franchise solutions, etc. So, completely disrupting that marketplace and likely to continue doing so. So, two interesting plays that are changing the way that we do business and the way that we buy our products in the grocery arena. This was a particular interesting one that I enjoyed looking at. I was tempted to get on board with the Dollar Shave Club, and I wasn't sure, and then interestingly, I must have at some point typed Dollar Shave Club into Google or something. Shortly after that, I got a feed on my Facebook page that would I be interested in buying my razors from Gillette directly from Gillette. So I looked at that, clicked on it, and did the math, and it seemed to make kind of sense. In fact, it seemed to be almost why would I not? And you start looking at that, and whilst there's obviously challenges for retailers in selling razor blades in store due to theft, etc., they're high price, good margin generally for manufacturer and retailer, and in something kind of yay large, cheap to post. It comes in a little envelope, and I get my delivery every 6 weeks or 8 weeks. So they're building a relationship, and I just automatically get sent my razors. And that's obviously Procter, and Dollar Shave Club was bought by their nemesis Unilever. So that whole shaving space is very quickly getting transformed, and a big part of the health and beauty basket for Woolworths and Coles is potentially leaving that basket. And note, obviously, P&G have a whole raft of typically more premium brands with good margin and good loyalty. So you wonder where that strategy might go next. So you look at that and think, well, okay, it's $28, and this was lifted off, I think, Coles online 3-4 days ago. $28 for a four pack of the Pro Glides. Unsurprisingly, Gillette direct $28 for the same 4 cartridges, but you get a free handle plus free delivery, and your 4th order is free. So it actually net per blade over time works out cheaper than the retailers. But critically, they're driving a lifetime loyalty for me because I'm now in the system. I've got extra blades. There's no excuse to run a blade for 6 weeks, as I've occasionally been known to do. And obviously, they've got a lot of margin to play with. And interestingly, and probably as if not possibly even more importantly, they're getting a whole heap of data, and I'll touch on that more as we go. A whole bunch of data that they can in turn then use. So I've just got being in the Southern Highlands, I've got my cup of tea and a POM, obviously. Meal kits are clearly here to stay. Again, it was only 7-8 years ago where HelloFresh had their first offer here in Australia. Marley Spoon 2015, and there's no empirical data on this, but the view is that it's somewhere in any given week 1 million to 1.5 million meals being served by these boxes, and that's growing at a furious rate. It'd be probably the fastest growing part of grocery right now at about 40% per annum. We've done the math, did a piece of work with Channel 9 on this. We did the math around, is this cheaper or more expensive in terms of your meal? And versus scratch, it's about 30-35%, sometimes a bit more expensive to buy the meal kit than actually make the meal yourself, albeit it's the exact quantity, so you may be not throwing things away, things aren't going to waste. But it clearly is on Woolworths and Coles' radar, and certainly a concern. Woolworths invested in Marley Spoon, and Coles have been very aggressively launching their own meal solutions. I tried to do a count. I did it about a year ago, and I think it was about 20-25 providers. I had a look the other day, and there was over 40. And every month another one pops up. So, it really is an awful lot of providers getting into this space, offering a grocery solution. So if there's 8.5 million households in Australia, 25 million people, you can do the math. 1 million meals a week, starts becoming a very tangible, measurable part of the overall offer. So and this is a piece of data from Nielsen late last year. So it's already grown, beyond that, where the food boxes or meal kits were about 9% of what they believe to be that total sort of online offer. COVID's been obviously interesting in that respect. Most of those companies, the big ones certainly, over the course of April and May, weren't taking any new subscriptions. They were literally at capacity. So they were budgeting for 40% growth, and they have clearly, I would suspect, exceeded that over the last quarter. So whilst COVID has clearly been pretty catastrophic for many businesses, you think for the meal boxes, it's been a tremendous forced sampling exercise where they've had the opportunity to get in front of people and show them their wares. So again, I'd be astounded if Woolworths and Coles aren't looking at this with wide open eyes, as it ticks an awful lot of the boxes that we're looking for as shoppers. Quality, convenience, natural ingredients, better for you type constructs, and in fact, flip back to the previous slide. You can see on this one here, there's a whole bunch that are specifically playing to either the gym bunnies or organic, diabetics, celiacs, etc., etc. So they're becoming very good at trying to really carve a niche out and own it. And they tend to be the niches that the major retailers also look to leverage, and because they typically are premium. So kind of where's that going? We saw, as I said before, the Woolies and Coles particularly growing through a consolidation of grocery from smaller players into the major chains. And I think it's fair to say in the last 4, 5, 6 years, if anything, we're starting to see a fragmenting rather than a consolidation of the marketplace. The iPhone and smartphones and technology generally have really opened the door to us to look at the way we order things differently, find out about things, how we engage with brands, how we engage with better for you type concepts. Spent a bit of time working in the plant-based space. The number of brands that have exploded in the last year alone in the plant-based meat replacement is huge. A chunk out of New Zealand, a chunk out of the US, and 1 or 2 out of Australia as well. So that area is only going to continue growing, but in large part because things like Facebook and digital and social are really allowing us to better understand these places. So the way that the market will continue to then evolve, in my opinion, this is my view, not necessarily fact, is that these new plays will continue to aggressively grow. And you look at Woolworths and Coles, and they have an awful lot of infrastructure. They've got an awful lot of stores, best part of 2,000 between them. That's a lot of bricks and mortar, and that's a lot of real estate. We heard presentations earlier talking about Kodak and Fuji and the like, but there's a whole bunch of brands that have been and gone. Not suggesting for 1 minute that Woolworths and Coles are going to disappear over the next decade or so, but you look at some of those brands that were heavily focused and had huge resource and infrastructure behind their offer. They found it very difficult to pivot quickly, and I think that's something that we'll see in grocery over the next five or so, possibly even quicker, 5 or so years. You'll obviously, that's a nice little PowerPoint representation of a store, and there's probably not a single store like it, but you kind of get the idea. So a typical kind of grocery store. You look at all of the bits, not necessarily just around the edge, but a lot of the stuff around the edge typically is higher margin, higher basket value. It's where there's often a bit more room. We browse, we have a very specific view of what it is we want to buy. We're not just buying a tin of beans. We're engaging with the whole product experience. And it's what helps the retailers differentiate what they do. And if they don't do it right, so things like deli are very difficult to manage, very, very resource hungry, got to do a lot of cleaning. It's difficult to make good money out of the deli consistently. You drop traffic in those areas, it's absolutely suicidal for retailers. So we take some of those things that I've just touched on and really start exploring, well, what does that mean? And you look at things like HelloFresh. I've picked on HelloFresh. It could be Marley Spoon or any number of them. They're basically cherry picking a lot of the interesting bits. So your proteins, your steak or your chicken or your fish, the fruit and veg to match that goes with that meal, and then potentially some condiments. But the majority of the value of that box really comes from the bits that the retailers are very precious about and endeavor to do a really great job in that space. So when you start losing some of that, that becomes really quite important, as the infrastructure to manage that is costly, and it gets very difficult to make that viable if you start losing material chunks to alternate players like the box meal offer. Uber Eats is a really interesting one as well, and again, relatively new and not even national yet. The ability to now get a meal for $15, $20, $25 delivered to your front door, you start doing the math around whether I could make it for that. And often, to make a Thai curry for $25 delivered, I think it'd be a real challenge unless you were really good at what you did. So suddenly, be it either the meal solution that Coles is very actively looking at, or even the component like HelloFresh, the component parts, that whole home delivery, be that Uber Eats, Menulog, and again, there's more cropping up literally every month. There's another player. That is a space that will continue to cause headaches for the retailers as we get lazy and like the idea of a tremendous Thai curry. Touched on Pet Circle, so they're kind of cherry picking the pet piece. Pet for most retailers really important. High loyalty, typically good margin, and really important part of the basket for a pet owner. So you start taking bits of that out, that hurts. We talked about Gillette Direct. Start taking out some of those high value, high margin items from the health and beauty aisle, then that starts hurting. I mean, it's a little bit like certainly when my kids are sitting around the table with a pizza, unless we chop it up, the pepperoni goes first, followed by the pineapple bits, etc. It's a little bit like that here. If the store's the pizza, all these fragmented players are taking pieces off it, and you very quickly end up with a slice of dough with a bit of sauce and cheese. Difficult to make that really viable as a retailer. And then Aldi, obviously, I've drawn the circle just around the middle. They obviously have meats and the like as well, but they're really just about trying to take that very main staple basket item out of Woolworths and Coles, and they can do that so much more efficiently than a full-service grocer. That even with a private label strategy, it'll be very difficult for Woolworths and Coles to compete long-term and remain viable with the price points that Aldi offer. They've got to be good at all of the bits around the outside of the store that differentiate their offer from Aldi. So I guess, if you will, the pizza's been attacked by an awful lot of folk. Where's that kind of going? There's a whole bunch of things that we care about that we would particularly, again, things like a Facebook feed. If you are a loyal Sukin user and on your Facebook feed it's something that says, by the way, you can now get your favorite Sukin products delivered direct to home at the same price as either a Priceline or the offer in Coles, you might be tempted to do that. The Pet Circle offer on pet food, etc., etc. A month's supply of Huggies, one of those big bulky items that you really don't want to put in the trolley and have to get in the car and take home. If that rocks up, how many nappies you use every week. If that just rocks up at home and is the same price or better priced, then that suddenly starts becoming a very interesting proposition. So they're all the kind of the juicy, tasty parts of the pizza that we progressively are getting more offers being put in front of us from non-bricks and mortar plays that will change the margin profile of the way that particularly Woolworths and Coles, and to a certain extent the IGA stores play. If you can post it, now Australia Post just a logo, but you know, obviously no end of players again in that space. If you can post it, then and it's of high enough value, and the postage makes sense as a percentage of the total price, that's somewhere that we will continue to see exponential growth in that space. So that kind of leaves us with everything else. You know, I've got to count. I'm sure there's some of my clients listening, but you know, the non-sexy stuff, arguably, a 36-pack of Quilton. Again, one of those, you know, big items, 24-pack of, you know, Pepsi or Coke. It takes up a lot of trolley space. Typically, the retailers price compete on those, so it's difficult to run a retail operation just offering these types of products. You can't make the kind of blended margin without all the other good stuff just on these things alone. So what we've seen through the COVID piece, and I'll touch on it briefly in a tick, is they lend themselves beautifully to home shopping. So if I don't need to put a whole meter cube of large bulky items in my trolley because for free or for a small fee they'll deliver it to me, why wouldn't I? But again, that whole home delivery, difficult for the retailers to make that as viable as in-store shopping from a margin contribution perspective. So very difficult position where the good stuff is disappearing stage left, and the mainstream stuff is proving very difficult to make a full fat margin on. There's kind of, and the bit that then you know, the retailers should be and generally are good at is things where we really have a care factor. I'm not happy to have a home shopping person select my avos or my steak for me. I've got a clear view on what I want. You know, the fish has got to be just so, or my cheese, particularly, you know, potentially $100 a kilo or whatever. I don't want yay much. I only want yay much. So I want to be able to choose that. And whilst that tends to be the periphery shopping, how much store do I need to be able to do that if I'm losing an awful lot of the other moving parts of my offer? So, you know, I start looking at the infrastructure that I've got as a retailer. And if I'm starting to lose an awful lot of the bits around the edge and the sexy bits out the middle, the store really doesn't lend itself well to competing with an Aldi. With 1,500 SKUs and, you know, 300 square meters. It's the wrong shape for home shopping. It's very difficult to pick and pack from a store versus a dark store, as Woolies is now doing. And there's way too much space for the sexy bits on the outside that we want to choose. It needs a lot of people to keep it open and running, and a lot of utilities as well. And you've got to drive there and park, and it's not as convenient as it might be. So for me, the real big watch out is as we see this, you know, and I'm bold enough to say I think it's a revolution over the last 5 years of different ways of accessing our groceries. It is very, very quickly making these large footprint bricks and mortar grocery stores ever more challenging and ever more difficult to make profitable. And the thing that you look at, the bit that's in common with a lot of these other players is they really have little or no infrastructure. Average age 17 3/4 in many instances. They're young, agile, exciting teams that are really unafraid to break the rules. And they haven't got 300, 400, 1,000 stores. They've maybe got 2, 3 large sheds, most of which they're renting from somebody else and don't own. And the really scary bit is many of them don't need to make a profit in the short term. It's all about geography grab and hoping that someone comes along and buys them for gazillion dollars, even though they're making no money. So really tough when you're doing business with people like this, where, you know, obviously, you know, Woolworths and Coles and Metcash have shareholders that demand a return. A lot of these new plays don't need to make those kind of returns in the short to medium term. So they can play quite differently, and that makes them quite scary. For a chunk of these, and again, I've just pulled some, you know, prime examples. It's actually not even about making money. Amazon famously, you know, buy things, not necessarily because they can sell more through them, but because they're buying an audience, they're buying shoppers, they're buying a database. And we're seeing that ever more often. And there's obviously a lot of noise, particularly currently around Coles data, and also the Woolworths loyalty card data, etc. Excuse me. So you look at, it's no surprise that Wesfarmers retained a share of Flybuys, as they fully recognise that the value of the data is enormous. And obviously live right now, Velocity, worth materially more than the entire Virgin airline, as the database they've got is huge. So a lot of these pure plays or these new digital businesses are fully aware of the fact that they're harvesting data on you, and the value of the data may exceed the profit they make from the items they're selling from you. So that makes them very difficult to compete with. Kind of whistling through at a fair old rate here, and I really want to leave some time at the end for questions. Just wanted to touch on some of the, and this is not insider knowledge. This is just all gleaned from the net. Obviously, the top there we're seeing, that's the Ocado warehouse. So Coles investing an awful lot of money in Ocado. So that says home shopping is going to be a big part of their future. There's no people picking and packing. It is a entirely automated operation. So that is a very, very, very big investment that they're making. Woolworths as well, looking to refit, redesign a whole bunch of their stores to make them more able to do home shopping. So be that back dock redesigns, etc., etc. So again, material infrastructure that they are looking to invest, and they've also partnered with Uber through COVID to really change the way that they do home shopping. We're seeing a lot of, and I should put the Flybuys logo there, but we're seeing a lot of noise around the whole loyalty card piece as well. Woolies invested in Marley Spoon, already mentioned that. So again, they're putting a bet around the food boxes. I'd be astounded if at some point Woolworths and Coles don't either buy one or more of these players and or create their own meal box home delivered type solutions. You would think they could buy all of the ingredients to fill those boxes cheaper than HelloFresh or Marley Spoon. They just need the infrastructure to be able to do it. Coles bought Dual Fine Foods, so they see that whole ready meal piece as being a major play, and have launched a whole series of ready to eat meal solutions. It's kind of, I guess, worth noting they and Woolworths have done that many times over the last 20 years, in large part copying a lot of what you see in the UK. But maybe the time is right now where we are becoming more tuned into that convenience and the quality and the nutritional benefit of some of those solutions. So they're really making some quite material plays in the hundreds of millions or billions in changing their footprint, changing their infrastructure, changing their dependency on a traditional bricks and mortar model. So kind of who are going to be the winners? Well, kind of the fast ones, the ones that can change the quickest, the ones that are prepared to really take the big moves. I was surprised that Woolworths and Coles haven't bought one of the big pet plays yet. I would have thought they would do, be that Pet Barn or Pet Circle, but really kind of think if we can't offer a competitive offer in our aisle, then we'll buy those offers. But prepared to challenge the norms. And the bottom point there really is an important one as well. When you're dealing or trying to fight against businesses, even like Aldi, where the profit expectation is so different to what Woolworths and Coles traditionally have delivered, you've got to be able to change the metrics. You need to be able to change the way that you look to do business. Apologies, I forgot to mention on the previous slide as well some really interesting plays from Woolworths on B2B as well. So launching a kind of a business-to-business, wholesale type model as well, which clearly indicates their intention to continue stretching their footprint into non-standard grocery. Can I touch very briefly on, and I don't want to repeat what others have said, and I've stolen a couple of slides with pride here. The impact of COVID, and you've seen plenty of graphs and charts around. We've gone online. Woolworths and Coles pulled their home shopping because they couldn't keep up. The Marley Spoons and HelloFreshes stopped taking on new clients because, again, they couldn't keep up. So it's kind of forced us to behave differently. The fact that we're having this conference with me talking at a little camera on top of my screen, and you guys are all listening at home, has really taught us some new skills and forced us to behave differently. But I guess the huge question is whether it's a permanent change, whether it's something that is going to change the way that we do business. We've seen, and this is a picture or a chart, sorry, from IRI. People like Metcash, the IGA stores, have absolutely smashed it as we've shopped locally. I was talking to a colleague in New Zealand, a man over in Auckland, and so I wrote some notes because they're obviously kind of ahead of us. They've kind of gone through the COVID curve a little more quickly than we have, albeit of 5 million people, not 25 million people, so they probably had a little easier, but they also locked down entirely. You look at so foodstuffs, home delivery, so home shopping was about 2-point-something%. Again, that's an estimate. Through the COVID spike, that pushed up towards around 8-odd%. And the view is that now that people can go back to stores, that's somewhere around 2.5, maybe 3. Ditto foodstuffs, 8 through to 12, coming back to 10, or that's the estimate at the moment. So I think it's very easy to kind of get very excited about what COVID has done. Yeah, very scary about what COVID has done, but the behaviours it's driven. But certainly, I found myself last week, we had the opportunity to go out and was dead excited to go to the RSL and have a schnitty. It had been 3 months. So, and it's the same with in New Zealand. People are going, I can go out, I'm going to go back to the supermarket. I'm going to go and find the steak that's just right, or the avo that's just soft enough. So whilst we've experimented with some of these new behaviours, in New Zealand at least, 90% of that endeavour has gone back to the way that it was before. And this is an Australian chart. I think it's an Accenture business, yes, part of the Accenture group, where they look at, and it's based on credit card transaction. And obviously there's a whole bunch of particularly discretionary spending that dropped off through COVID. But what's kind of interesting is that first week, and this is data for 1st of June through 8th of June, a lot of that's kind of almost back to where we were. So now that we have the opportunity to go and do some of the things we've always enjoyed doing, being at a schnitty at the RSL, or even just going to the local store to buy our groceries with a degree of comfort and safety, we are going inevitably back to some of those behaviours. So for me, the takeout here, and when I started writing this presentation, I thought, we'll do it all about COVID, all about COVID. Actually, the underlying trends are far more profound and far more challenging, particularly for the grocers to wrestle with. And as a result, the COVID piece has accelerated some of that learning new behaviours, but it's trends that were there already. We've just been forced to play a little harder and a little quicker. So I'd be very reluctant to say that COVID has been the catalyst for change. The change was there, and we're going to see more of those pure plays coming into the market. And as we heard from previous presentations, previous recessions have shown us that the brave who move fast and do things differently have typically mopped up either during or shortly after those very challenging environment or financial times. So, making a play now is likely to be high on a lot of folks' agenda, as there is already disruption afoot. I started looking a little bit at some of the, in fact, I was talking to a bunch of suppliers this week who were calling me saying, well, do we have to go and do promotions again? And you're already seeing the half prices again in grocery. So that underlying trend of the good bits of the pizza getting nicked off the pizza by non-grocery players or non-core traditional grocery players means that mainstream grocery is going to get tougher. So, I know there was certainly a more amicable mood in the marketplace. If you could deliver your product in full and on time, then you were a hero. But it wasn't a particularly aggressive environment. I think there's no doubt that it will get harder for the retailers to maintain the kind of margins they maintain, and that inevitably then cascades through to suppliers having to in turn play harder with the retailers as well. And for me, it's really simple. Either be the best price or the most interesting. And we heard earlier about brand equity. if you can't build your brand equity, then you're going to have to be the best price on shelf. And in the short term, the retailers are more interested in you being best price on shelf than you building your brand equity. So you've got to manage that dynamic to maintain your point of difference and your price premium. I thought this was a really cool product, a blueberry hemp kefir lactose-free probiotic. So if ever you can get more things in one thing, blueberry, superfruit, hemp, kefir, so a fermented product, lactose-free as well, and a probiotic, blah, blah, blah. So if there's one product with everything in it, to me, this is just and I don't know this company, but I think it's a brilliant example of if we're going to play hard, and we're going to do it really. And this is in mainstream distribution. So, those kind of product ideas are going to be ever more important in the marketplace. And if you want to win with Woolworths and Coles, it's with things like that you will. Think about the broader route to market. There's many ways of getting onto the plate, and we're hearing more and more suppliers having really very constructive conversations with non-core grocery. Be that the Marley Spoons, the Hello Freshes, the food service. Food service will bounce. It'll come back. Obviously, it's been profoundly impacted. If my RSL experience was that I had to book a seat at the RSL, and people will go back to food service, and with a vengeance over the next next 6 months. I would be surprised if food service doesn't have an enormous resurgence. And again, manufacturers that do a good job in playing in that space are going to be winners and supporting those outlets now through their tough times. And kind of learning to play differently. I think this is pretty much my last slide. You look at the pace of change when you go 20 years from home shopping through to ready meals in a retailer. That's not going to cut it going forward. You've got to be nimble. You've got to be able to play differently. And again, a lot of work we do with suppliers is saying, look, are you match fit for this? Are you even structured right? Have you got a probably 20 or 30-year-old something that is looking at the way that you play this new digital platform? And it's not about being ageist, it's about people who have grown up with this technology and it's part of their DNA rather than old muckers like me that have had to learn it rather than it being intrinsic to how we live. Recognize that it is only going to get tougher, and you've got to actively play in those spaces, accepting, as per some of the previous slides, that in the first 2-3 years you might not make any money out of it. And that's just the cost of having to do business in that new space. Find the right partners, people that you can do business with, people that you can learn from. The suppliers that are going to sit there and continue just looking at their terms negotiations with Woolworths and Coles. Quick tip, over the next 5 years, they're going to make more margin out of you. You've got to find different ways of doing business that aren't just reliant on Woolworths and Coles. So, you really got to be brave and take risks. Because all of the pizza stealers around Woolworths and Coles are inevitably taking huge risks. As a supplier, you've got to front into that as well. So it really is going to, you'd be a fool to think that in the next 5 years the rate of change isn't going to accelerate further, and most of that opportunity is likely to, most of it, a big chunk of that opportunity will be outside of the four walls of a traditional grocer. Looking at some of those direct models and digital pure plays. So I hope that helps. That's kind of my view of where I think some of the world in Australia is going. Happy to take questions.
Neil, thank you. You did an absolutely tremendous job there, Neil. Well done to you with your cup of tea that never seems to finish. Do you have a little refilling station there, Neil, at the bottom of the screen? Because that's a big cup of tea you've managed to hold on to for an hour.
Tips.
What was that? Hang on, we'll just see. I think we've got a question. Is food likely to go the way of luxury goods with experience stores, tasting stores with people buying these products online? That's a question that we have.
I think it's, turn my speaker down so I don't echo. There we go. There's a lot of a business, and someone referenced it earlier. A business I really love is the Maggie Bear business, obviously based down there in SA with you, and what Maggie's done with her products is she's built a trust factor that we don't actually need to try the products. If I buy a Maggie Bear pate, I know it's going to be bloody good. I don't need to go and try it. There's a whole bunch of other products though. So if I'm buying fruit, veg, nice cheeses, expensive delicatessen meats, etc., it's very difficult to do that online. You kind of want to touch it, feel it, smell it, taste it, and buy those products. But certainly when you start looking at some of the more niche, the Maggie Bear, some of the beautiful olive oils, etc., inevitably those businesses, and a lot of those businesses, SA, WA, some of the more rural parts of New South Wales. I mean, there's some really fantastic businesses out there doing a really great job, and they will continue to do so, and we'll continue to support them and buy. But as a percentage of overall grocery, that's a 0.000 something. So as a future trend, yes, it will continue. Will it change the way that we do business? I don't think so. I think what is more threatening for the mainstream grocers is when you take all the high profit bits of the pizza off the pizza, it by definition puts more profit pressure on everybody else that's left. So if you start taking Huggies, Tresemme, Gillette, all the expensive bits out of that store, it makes it difficult for that store to remain viable. That in turn will put enormous pressure on everybody else.
Neil, thank you. We're going to leave it there. We're going to let you get back to your Southern Highlands life. But thank you so much for being with us today. That was a fantastic talk. We've got lots of really good feedback coming through on you. So can we have a round of applause, please, for Neil? Neil Rechlin, well done.